America, the land of opportunity. Anybody can be as successful as they want to be. All they have to do is work hard for it. There are plenty of black people that have made it big. Those who don't just aren't trying hard enough. I'm sure we've all heard these statements or statements like these at some point in time. While I do believe it's true that anyone can become a success financially, statements like these severely undermine the historical challenges that black people have faced due to intentional roadblocks placed in our path multiple times in history. Without delving too deeply into the most obvious historical setback, let's have a brief history lesson on some of the more recent impediments that made the playing field a little less level than it's often portrayed to be. Black codes were put into place immediately after slavery was legally abolished in 1865. Their sole purpose was pretty much to ensure white former slave owners that they would continue to receive slave labor in the form of indentured servants, thanks to the loophole in the 13th Amendment that pretty much states that slavery is legal as long as someone commits a crime. Some of the black codes included laws that prohibited black people from owning over a certain amount of property, laws that prevented any black person from holding any occupation other than a farmer or a servant unless they were able to pay an annual tax on it, laws that forced black people to sign yearly labor contracts that, if they refused, could result in them being arrested or fined. If for any reason they left the contract before the term was up, they would have to forfeit any money that was earned up to that point. Laws that penalized anyone who was willing to pay a black worker a higher wage than they were already earning, and laws that considered black people to be vagrant if they were unemployed and didn't have a permanent residence, usually with their employers. If found to be guilty, they could be arrested or fined and forced to provide plantation labor as a trade-off if they couldn't afford to pay. And then there were these guys, many of which held rank and powerful positions in the military, the police force, and in courthouses. This, of course, made it easy for many offenders to be arrested and difficult for a fair trial to be held when these offenses did occur. Jim Crow laws that were put into place to make it especially difficult for black people to vote ensured that these powerful people stayed in power. On top of the laws that were intentionally put in place and biasly enforced to restrict the freedom and progression of the black community, the notion of separate but equal was also in play. This doctrine made sure that black and white communities stayed segregated and was later deemed as inherently unequal by the Supreme Court. This was due to the blatant discrepancy in the resources that were being dispersed for establishments in white communities versus in black ones. Jim Crow wasn't actually legally addressed until these laws were passed, not too long ago, which means that this was really the first time we actually legally had the same rights and opportunities as the other group. Before then, there were no real legal prohibitions that stopped employers from discriminating against hiring people of color, or that addressed the blatant attempt to eliminate our right to vote or have a say in the political process that could have long overturned the legal roadblocks that were obstructing our advancement. Redlining was the practice backed by the federal government of banks denying loans to people applying to move into or currently living in undesirable areas. I'm sure you can guess what made a neighborhood undesirable. This form of housing discrimination wasn't legally addressed until the Fair Housing Act of 1968, but by then, the damage had already been done. Because of this practice, the typical homeowner that lives in a neighborhood that was redlined has earned about 52%, or about $212,023 less in personal wealth generated by property value increases over the last 40 years. While redlining is no longer legal, there are still instances of it that occur in the present day, including reverse redlining, also referred to as predatory lending, in the form of establishments that coincidentally tend to pop up disproportionately in our neighborhoods and forces its borrowers into loans with unfair and unreasonable terms. These borrowers are often people who the lenders know are in dire need of money, but would be hard-pressed to find a place that would lend them money otherwise. So in a nutshell, if anyone tries to convince you that systematic oppression doesn't exist and hasn't since slavery, maybe it's about time for them to have a little history lesson themselves. Think of it as a foot race. White people's ancestors have been running it unobstructed for over 240 years in America, each generation having the opportunity to smoothly pass the baton on to the next. We, on the other hand, have had road spikes thrown in front of us, potholes dug on the track, banana peels dropped, etc. And we've not been able to get the officials to call a penalty until just a few years ago. Almost 200 years later. Now, we're expected to catch up while forgetting about the bleeding that the spikes have caused, the broken ankle from the hole in the track that you stepped into, and the concussion that came from falling after slipping on the banana peel. The good news is that since the passing of the Civil Rights, Voting Rights, and Fair Housing Acts, Generation X was the first generation of Black people that were legally afforded the same opportunities as others. My goal here is to help put people in the mindset to take full advantage of that fact and begin to take charge of their personal financial lives so that our community as a whole can thrive economically as a result. With that said, if you made it this far through the video, thank you for watching. If you learned something new or found value in something that was said, please like and subscribe to the channel for more content on how the Black community can gain control of their financial situations to move past all of the historical roadblocks that have been thrown in front of us once and for all.